Welcome. Today is a Market Systems Development webinar hosted by the Refugee Self-Reliance Initiative. We're happy to have you all here. The topic for today is combining market systems development and direct approaches to achieve greater impact on refugee self-reliance. My name is Ali Gillespie, and I'm the RSRI's Network Engagement Coordinator. So the RSRI hosts a community of practice, which is a network of professionals engaged in supporting refugee self-reliance, as well as those that consider themselves an advocate for the socioeconomic inclusion and self-reliance of refugees throughout their work. I would like to invite you to join our community of practice if you're not a member already. I'll post the link in the chat, and we would love to have you join us. We host a lot of virtual events, including webinars, virtual coffee hours, bi-monthly learning calls, and a number of other events. So would love to have you join us. But now I will hand the call over to the RSRI's MSD Task Team Lead, Sasha Muench. Over to you, Sasha.
Thank you very much, Ali, and welcome everybody. Nice to see everybody coming on. And for those of you who are just joining, as Ali said, please put your name, organization, where you're calling in from in the chat. And I am joined today by Nadja Nutz from the ILO, the International Labour Organization, and John Francis Omusolo from Mercy Corps. And before we dive in, a couple of housekeeping things. We're hoping to have a robust discussion. Nadja and John are going to give you some program examples, and then we're going to leave lots of time for discussion. So please put questions you have into the chat. And we've enabled everybody to talk, so hopefully those of you who have experience can unmute yourselves and join the conversation. But let's dive in. Before I hand it over to them, let me share my screen, and I'm going to just give you a little bit of the terminology and framework so that everyone knows what we're talking about. So using the ILO's diagram here, what we're talking about today is combining direct and indirect approaches to refugee self-reliance. And as you see on the left, direct interventions, which are also sometimes called push interventions, are, just as they say, working directly with participants. So that's giving them training, legal aid, or giving them information, but working directly with the people that you have targeted. And the advantages of this approach is you know exactly who's benefiting from the work, and you know how they are responding to the activities. The weaknesses of this approach is that when the project ends, those activities end. There's no sustainability afterwards. And there's just no money, time, resources in the world to help everybody who needs help with this approach. There's just too much need in the world. On the right, you can see we have the other side, which is called systems interventions, also sometimes called pull interventions. And those are working more indirectly. Rather than working directly with the participants, it's working indirectly with the organizations, the companies, the government around those people to help them get better services, information, support, so that they can make their lives better, more sustainable. And so that could be partnering with microfinance institutions to offer more loans, or partnering with government to change business regulations or work permits. And the benefit of this approach is that it can reach many more people, because if you change business regulations, that can help all small business owners in the country. And it's more sustainable because those services are not offered by the organization, so they can continue on into the future. The weakness of this approach is it's much harder for the organization to know who's benefiting, because you're not working directly with those participants. And often the most marginalized people that we really want to get the benefit struggle to get those benefits because they're the ones struggling the most to engage with those market systems. So if you look at this in this pretty diagram, it's quite clear that we should be able to maybe combine these approaches to create greater impact. And organizations have been trying to do that for a number of years. In practice, sorry, can everybody please mute themselves if you're just joining? Thank you very much. In practice, obviously, this is much harder. As we know, everybody knows that the challenges come when you try things on the ground. And so today we're going to learn from a couple of examples. We're going to hear from the ILO's portfolio approach that has applied this in multiple countries across several different projects, and also from a program Mercy Corps is running with Village Enterprise that's much more targeted and specific, using a specific direct approach, graduation approach, combined with MSD, Market Systems Development. And then hopefully we'll have a good discussion. They've got a lot of interesting learning, and we're interested to hear from you too. So with that, over to Nadja to get started. And before Nadja starts, please, everybody, if you're just coming in, put your name and where you're calling in from in the chat, and any questions you have, and we'll get to them after. Thank you very much. And over to you, Nadja.
Thank you very much, Sasha, and thanks to everybody for listening in and for having me here today. So I'm going to talk a little bit about the ILO specific approach to inclusive market systems. That's basically, Sasha already nicely introduced our key framework here. So the approach to inclusive market systems was really first developed together with the UNHCR when we first started working together with the UNHCR in 2014, so quite some time back already. And so over time, we've developed that approach further. We've developed, designed different guides, one of which you can see here. And this is now being applied really in some 20 plus refugee hosting countries in different contexts. And so what Sasha already outlined a little bit, AIMS essentially is a push-pull approach to refugee livelihoods. Yes, next slide, please. Thank you. And so how did that come about, you might ask? When we started working with the UNHCR, first thing we did was we looked at kind of what's happening in that space right now. What are good practices in terms of livelihood interventions for refugees? To help them promote their livelihoods and some income generating activities. And what we've seen is that the large majority of projects in that space actually worked on the supply side of the labor market. What that means is there's a lot of projects that worked on skills development and capacity development for refugees. Lots of technical trainings, and then often in combination with giving refugees access to grants or some kind of financing, really in the hope of them being able then to start up some kind of income generating activity wherever they're based. But what we've seen is what is often lacking really is that idea of also looking at the markets. No? So in extreme cases, for instance, we've seen examples of the hairdresser trainings being rolled out for 1,000 refugees, but then you wonder, okay, who are they going to sell these services to? No, can there possibly be enough demand on the market for hairdressing services and haircuts so that 1,000 people can start up hairdressing salons? Probably not, no? So this idea of looking at the market, and seeing what can actually be done to create more opportunities on the market, to create more demand for services or products that could be offered by refugees, that in many cases was a bit absent from the thinking. And so on that basis, we really developed that approach that foresees this push-pull approach, where you would work on both sides. No? So it's for us, it's essential that you really look at the market. And in our case, we're really looking at sectors and specific value chains that we feel have the potential to be developed to create more opportunities. And then we look at the kind of supply side, what we call the push side, and see, well, what needs to be actually happening? What kind of skills and capacities and assets and things do refugees actually need to then piggyback on these opportunities that we're creating? So that in a nutshell is the idea of the approach. And then on the next slide, Sasha, if you'll go there. You'll see this is a quick study that we've done, actually looking at what's happening in terms of good practices and just interventions in the humanitarian development nexus in that space. And what we found with this study confirmed a little bit the suspicion that we had already. And that is that if you only do what we call the push side, no skills development, financial support, then that's usually not sustainable because you're not looking at the market side of things. And it often even doesn't address the root causes of things. No, refugees might have skills. That might not be the issue, but it might be market opportunities that are lacking. But then conversely, what we also found is that if you only do pure MSD, kind of pure value chain development, you're only developing the market and creating opportunities, that often benefits in a first step, at least, the ones that are most market ready, you know, the ones that already have some good base in terms of skills and assets to actually engage with these market opportunities. And you might leave out the more vulnerable part. Hence, it confirmed to us really that we need to look at these both sides now in order to have inclusive and sustainable strategies to refugee livelihoods. But so the key question that we're really going to discuss today is, well, how much pull and how much push is really needed in any given context? And how do you combine those? How do you interlink these different interventions in a way that it ultimately becomes a holistic strategy? And so I just want to quickly mention two examples, because what we've seen in the past 10 years of applying this in different contexts is that there's really no one size fits all approach. Now, obviously, it always depends on the context. And so just to highlight two examples, so the first one here is from Uganda, where the project worked in the sesame value chain. And so the way that worked was that there were refugees and host communities kind of producing sesame, and then on the other hand, you had far away, now in the capital city, you had private sector actors that were actually looking to buy more sesame. And so what the project did in terms of pull interventions was really to facilitate these links. And the way they did that was by training village agents that act as intermediaries. So they come in and they train on behalf of the private sector actors that is not located there. They train the refugees producers. They give them pre-financed inputs, and then they buy the produce, the sesame, and they sell that off to the private sector actor that actually exports that now. And so what that does really is it provides refugees with guaranteed access to pre-financed inputs, to all the training and guidance that they need to produce effectively, and with a guaranteed off-taker market for their product, right? And on the other hand, you have that private sector actors that also wins in the whole scheme because they get access to the sesame that they actually need. And so what you're seeing here is that the push and the pull were very closely linked in one intervention, right? So we established these linkages to the markets, to the off-taker, but in the same kind of intervention strategy, we also made sure that people actually gain access to training and to the pre-financing kind of that they needed to actually pre-finance all the things that they need for production. So that's Uganda, where the push was really used to build up the skills and the asset basis, the access to finance for refugees to actually engage with this off-taker with the market. And then I'd like to mention a second example that just to illustrate how different things can be. If you go to the next slide, Sasha, this is an example from Kenya where the context was very, very different because we're actually working in Nairobi. So this is not camp-based, but this is trying to support urban refugees that are based in Nairobi, Mombasa, Nakuru. And so what we're trying to do here is we've seen that there's a lot of refugees actually already working in different sectors, for instance, as beauticians, as artisans, construction workers. And so what currently happens though is that their income is very, very low because they work basically, you see on the left side here, kind of the conditions in which they work. These are usually informal little beauty salons that cater to a clientele that has very low purchasing power. And what we're trying to do is giving them access to better market opportunities. And the way we're trying to do that is by integrating them into online marketplace companies. So we're collaborating with a couple of startups that provide high-end beauty services to clients through platforms, and construction workers, so artisans that can come to your home and repair things, connecting them to higher-end clients or clients with higher purchasing power. No, and so by integrating refugees into these platforms, they gain access to more customers that are able to pay more also and ultimately increase their incomes. And so on the push side here, we're not targeting that actually to skills development because we found that people have quite good skills already. They know how to do their trade. It's just that access to market that lacks, no, that is lacking, no? But the push side of things is really directed at dealing with certain admin bottlenecks that we found, such as access to ID cards, to SIM cards that is needed. And in our case as ILO, we're also looking at their access to social protection schemes. So that's just to show that the way kind of the things that you deal with these push and pull interventions can be very different depending on the context, no? And so next slide, I just wanted to finish by highlighting some lessons that came out of this so far from us. And we've already mentioned that, and that's very obvious, no, how much push and pull and how these push and pull interventions are shaped depends so very much on the context. There's really no one size fits all. And what we've also seen is that in some contexts, and particularly when you're dealing with camp-based or settlement-based contexts, it can be really useful to engage with other organizations because oftentimes what we would need in kind of in terms of pull, in terms of training and financing that goes to refugees, that's already being done. No? And sometimes it's really useful to well understand what's happening already and how you can possibly build on the push that is already being done by other organizations by focusing more on the pull side of things. And then finally, what we've also seen is that how much push is needed can also depend just on the project objectives, no? So if your project, and maybe that's sometimes also just prescribed by the donor a little bit that you have, no? If your project is focused on the most vulnerable ones, so if you have, say you work in a camp-based context and you say, we have these 200 people that are very vulnerable that we need to support, then that will likely require a lot more push, no, to get these people market ready. As opposed to if you're working like us now in Kenya in an urban context where the idea is really just to generally improve the incomes and improve the framework conditions in which people work, then that will probably require a lot more pull and working on the market side, and then just seeing how that trickles down to different people. So I'm going to stop there. I think the next slide just very quickly points you to a couple of resources that we have in case you want to know more. Check out ilo.org/aims, where you find all our guides and publications on the subject. And I'm looking forward to discussing that more also with John Francis and sharing our experiences. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Nadja. And John, over to you. And please, just a reminder for everybody, If you have questions on Nadja's presentation, put it in the chat and we'll get to them after John. Go ahead, John.
Thanks, Sasha. And picking on from Nadja, our experiences are almost the same. And just like what Nadja said, it really depends on the context. So what the cases I'm going to present today here is a case where Mexico has piloted combining two proven solutions for poverty alleviation, especially for vulnerable communities, the poverty graduation and market systems approach. This is in a program called named DREAMS. The acronym is Delivering Resilient Enterprises and Market Systems. And what it really does is not very different from what Nadja just explained, that we are combining direct delivery approaches and seeing what those direct delivery market approaches, or how much stimulation those direct delivery market approaches can then lead to how much that can stimulate markets to begin to engage or include people that we have always considered excluded from the markets. So in our case, we have this DREAMS program running in 3 different countries, one in Uganda, mainly for refugees, in Ethiopia, the same, and then most recently in Tanzania, where we are working with naturalized citizens. So the real target number here is, for now, each country has a target to reach about 150,000. And of course, the main goal here is to improve their income and well-being, and then work towards them getting self-reliance, given the context of how refugees have lived in those displacements in the different contexts that we all know. Again, we are layering 2 models, poverty graduation and market systems. And of course, like I said, 3 countries, completely different contexts, completely not homogeneous populations, but that is the challenge we have at hand. So we are also aware that right now, as we have been implementing, one of the things we've been learning is that mental health was something we had not thought about in the design of this implementation. But as we know, statistics and research now tells us that when you are engaging with communities under displacement or refugees, for example, you are only working at 60%. The other 40% is already attributed to their mental well-being. And if that is not if it's not mainstreamed in your setup, you only know that you're working at 60%. So your rate of success stands at 60%. And that is now something that we are learning and beginning to really look at more critically, especially for the newer DREAMS, the Tanzania one coming in, that should be something that we would really want to put some energy on. Our earlier results for the first cohort are expected in June next year, but we've done a midterm evaluation, and those are the results that I will talk about briefly today. Next slide. Okay, so I just wanted to highlight a case of how DREAMS has engaged. Just like Nadja said, it's the design of the program sometimes can be rosy, but the main thing is how to actually make it operational. I can say that we struggled a little bit in the beginning, and after several trials, at least now we have a formula of how to move around and how to start to engage. It was all about, should we start with the push interventions? Should we start with the pull? Which one comes first? And those debates went on and on and on, and we lost some bit of time. But nonetheless, as much as we lost some bit of time, that also really gave us time to reflect and look at what would this cutting edge formula look like, and what would that mean for the sustainability of the two models combined together. So in the case you can see on the screen, this was a poultry intervention where we had, of course, the program provided bits of program participants with business skills. And then the participants through the push interventions, which is the poverty graduation, got seed capital. And then that seed capital enabled some participants to start buying the poultry that was available within the structures that the pool interventions, the market systems approach had stimulated. So within what the market approaches did were to look for private sector actors who had the incentive and were investing in that area to establish what we call mother unit operators. Basically, these ones are just community structures that brood day-old chicks to a point of around 1 month, and then after 1 month, the community can then be able to buy them and take them on and just let them scavenge. So the market systems side, because the capacity of those mother unit operators was really very low, was to ensure that at least they were able to match up with what the demand looked like in that space. And of course, that meant a little bit of investment here and there to make sure that they're market ready, but also that they're going to be able to accommodate the demand that is going to come from the participants who will demand, especially those who will have received the seed capital. So that, of course, was anchored along mentorship, where a private sector company was, we went into a partnership with to provide real on-site training, on-site technical support to make sure that at least you're keeping the mortality rates low, you're increasing the knowledge, and then you're also providing that, transferring that same knowledge to the community members or the recipients of the grants, such that they are able to also make sure that the birds have survived. So the batches were 3, just to make sure that they are ready to take on from that point. And in each of those batches, they contributed a portion of the money, and the program from the other end supported to make sure that the other gaps were closed. So after the batches were, the first batches were, I mean, there were losses in between there, and of course there were learnings. And trust me, up to now, the markets have picked up. The demand for those dual purpose breeds has gone up. And that is a testament that now the community is connected. They know if they want to buy a better breed of poultry, they know who to go to. If they want medication for their chicken, they now know where to go to, and they're connected. And that is the poultry case for Dreams. Next slide. So in terms of, again, looking at the trends, for example, we've done cohort. We are in the 4th year for Uganda. And the first cohort, I would say we were all still figuring out how do we go about really making these two approaches work in tandem or work together. We're like, should we do an integrated model? Should we sequence? Should we layer? And all those things were tried. But as Nadja hinted, you have two models having completely different sequences of when what should take place, and you want them to work together. That in most cases is not practical. So after testing the models, the first cohort didn't receive any support from the market side. The first cohort only received graduation support, and that then meant that as much as they had missed out on the graduation on the pool side, something still could have been done. So that meant that now they fell in the category of a sequenced modality where the push interventions were delivered, and then from whatever results or successes there were, or from whichever businesses now wanted to diversify, the market would then be ready to take them on. Like you'd see in the case of, for example, the poultry mother unit operators are now operational in the area. The sesame, the beans, the soybean, the sunflower agents are all now available, and all those input agents are in place. If, for example, a business, a retail business, probably selling foodstuffs, was established with the graduation support, then if they wanted to diversify because they had realized some profits, they would then be able to find opportunities that are created along the different value chains that then the pool intervention will have created. So in this case, what we've seen is that we've seen in the first cohort, we saw, of course, more of the income and expenditure going into consumption, and then a bit of it going into like if you saw the first annual consumption plus expenditure, this was the highest with the graduation participants because this was cohort 1. There was a delay, and then as time went by, you saw there's a switch. Like you can see communities and participants are beginning to switch now to begin to invest. They're saving and they're investing more, as opposed to those who only received one kind of modality in the beginning. So there was a switch, and that was very notable, especially in terms of savings and also in terms of asset acquisition. Next slide. So again, the cohorts were measured. There was cohorts of up to 120, 1,200 graduates. And what we are seeing here is that given the fact that this was administered in a refugee setting, you would see that 79% are still working within the selected sector during graduation. Like the graduation period we all know is 9 to 1 year, 9 months to 1 year period. But still within that period, you still see that up to 79%, if they selected, for example, sesame production, they were still heavily engaged in that. And 81% of those are refugees. Just to highlight, 86% have access to avenues of sale and of course, continuous production. 84% of those are refugees, just to highlight. So this is a clear testament that if the markets are primed properly, and if the linkages are done at an appropriate time, all the people within the setting, including refugees or the most vulnerable, will still remain receiving the services that the markets will have catalyzed. So you can see even the confidence rate up to 71%. Trust is a critical thing. We've seen scenarios where trust, especially in businesses, is a key factor of business success. In homogeneous communities, that's okay. But in communities that are completely dispersed and different, trust is a major issue. So yes, we've also seen that there is trust, and that is growing. And up to 70% of the refugees still trust that the market information that comes from private sector actors is actually legit information, and they would want to work with that, as opposed to probably trusting sources that come from people they have not interacted with. Next slide. So I just wanted to highlight a classical example of a poultry business that started with 250 birds. The first time he got the 250 raised, and then he went to the ground. And as in any business, for him, he did not. That's why there were three cycles. So in the first cycle, he lost almost all of his birds due to an illness. But then, because there were 3 cycles for that mother unit operator to bounce back and continue to learn from, he was able to move upwards, and that has continued. His business has continued to grow. After those 3 cycles, he's now bringing in over 1,000 birds in one batch from 250. So that is an example that if he didn't know where to buy, or if he hadn't received technical guidance from a trusted private sector player, or if he hadn't worked with any of the experienced market actors, after that first loss, he would have just fallen off and said, this thing just doesn't work. But because he had mentors, he had a company that is experienced in doing this kind of business, working alongside him and mentoring him, he kept on pushing. And that has given him a chance to continue to go upwards. Next slide. So I know there are so many questions around inclusion, and just in a glimpse, I would want to say that, back a bit, slightly back, okay, yeah. I just wanted to quickly say that at midline, what we are seeing that when it comes to decision making, we are seeing up to 72% of females, especially coming through the graduation model, making decisions on the cash they earn. 91% determine what that cash should be sorting out at the household level. 67% of those also have improved access to market information. But of course, that does not mean that they are doing well in all fronts. We've still see lots of issues around barriers in access to land, credit, because of the way the credit institutions and financial institutions are set up, and of course, technology as still the key barriers. Next slide. Next slide, please. So in terms of aligning, we know, like I said in the beginning, we have preset timelines for doing what. Of every approach has their own preset modality of engagement. Now, in a typical poverty graduation cycle, it starts with targeting. In a typical market systems development approach, it begins with a market assessment. So then those two can either start at the same time, or they can start at completely different times. So what we've learned is that when it's difficult to make them start at the same time, so you have to strike a balance. And that's where then deciding whether you're going to sequence or layer or integrate makes the most sense. So the decision then rests on what is it that you are really aiming to achieve at the end of the day. case in point, you may have done your market assessment, and the value chain you're going to do is supposed to be a rain-fed value chain, and it's a dry season. You can't start it at that point. So what then do you do? Do you, I mean, at that point, probably the groups and the small business groups have gone through the cycle, and they've reached a point where they're supposed to receive the seed money, but the season does not allow you to engage in an agricultural activity. So what do? Do you tell the people who have gone through the mandatory process and have qualified to receive the seed grant that you can't receive because there's no rain, because most of the enterprises you've chosen can't be grown at that time? So there you have to make a decision that now it just makes logical sense for these businesses to start probably other retail businesses, and then later on, once the season becomes favorable, they can then switch back as an expansion plan or as a diversification alternative, switch to this. After all, you will still have market actors who will have primed the markets, will have created enough incentives, and are heavily and willing to engage with that particular cohort. Right? Next slide, please.
I think, John, I can see the next slide. I think maybe you're delayed.
Next slide.
John,
yes, I can.
Yeah, I think
can now see it.
We're on.
So
okay.
What we are also seeing in this integrated model as our as early signs of Can you hear me now?
Yes, we can hear you. Oh.
Can you hear me now?
Yes.
Okay. So in terms of what we are seeing as early signs of impact, yes. Sorry, my network seems to be shaky. So we've also seen that as much as the communities we engage with have heavy engagement with other development initiatives, it's important that we continue to facilitate the connections between the graduates and the other ongoing government programs, just to make sure that they remain connected, just in case there are shocks that may come afterwards. The second thing we've also seen through these same initiatives of partnerships with other like-minded or humanitarian agencies is that one of the things that, for example, the poverty graduation model, after 1 year, graduates people out of the poverty cycle. And that then means that for agencies like WFP, who are now saying, look, we have constraints, we cannot continue to provide the same food rations to everybody. This becomes an avenue where then that intersection becomes like a point of reference where, yes, this particular target population have now access to businesses. They're able to have 3 decent meals in a day. They have some bits of assets. So those can then relieve the pressure on agencies like WFP, and then they are deregistered from the traditional food ration cycles. The other bit of it is DREAMS did facilitate engagements with government to increase access to land, because that's a hindrance. Now, that in itself, the prices of land were going crazy. People were hiring land at very outrageous prices. But this negotiation with government is now giving access to communities, especially to those displaced persons, for longer periods. And it's because we're able to negotiate that well and facilitate those engagements between those communities and then government and the landlords. So
I think we might have just lost John,
Yeah.
but I think he was at the end of his presentation. So I am going to stop sharing the screen. And please, everybody, if you have questions for Nadja or John, put them in the chat here, and hopefully we'll get John back in a minute. Nadja, quick question for you, putting you on the spot to get things started. So you said that the push and pull really depends on the context, but how do you find that optimal balance? If you have flexibility, what is the ideal balance between push approaches and pull approaches?
Yeah, that's a good one. I'm not sure I have a super clear answer, but I think, I mean, it's all, at the end of the day, it's not really rocket science. No, you have to kind of balance the two out. I do think that it's important right from the start, because we've been also talking about, no, what comes first? Do you start with the push? Do you start with the pull? I think what is really, really important to keep in mind is the market side from the beginning. Know that from the beginning, you'll need to have a vision of where the market opportunities are for refugees specifically. I'm saying this also because I've been in discussion with people, or also in trainings that we do, when you know, people start with the training side and they've kind of trained a lot of people on a specific technical skill, and then they say, okay, so now how do we create demand for this? And I think that just never works. It just doesn't work that way, or at least I've never seen examples of where that works. No, so what I'm trying to say is it shouldn't be an afterthought. I think you need to have from the start an idea and a vision of where the market opportunities are and what refugees reasonably can produce in terms of products or services that will actually meet that demand. No. That said, you then, if you have that idea of where the opportunities are, I do think you then need to go back to see, well, what are refugees actually currently doing, and what are their skill sets, etc. You know, conversely to the example that I just mentioned, I've also seen projects where there is that kind of really cool, innovative vision of what, you know, like refugees could provide digital services or something because there's an opportunity there on the market. Yeah, cool. But then if refugees have been working in agriculture all their life, the majority of them, then that doesn't work. No, it's not done with a quick training to kind of move them into a complete other sector. So I think it's just a balancing act. No, you go back and forth kind of between the market side and the side of looking at what are the capacities in the background of the target group, and then hopefully you'll land. I mean, for us, it's usually a process of going back and forth, and then you kind of zoom in. No, step by step, there's a lot of sectors that just fall out of your shortlist because either no market opportunities or just doesn't fit with the background and the skills that refugees have. And then hopefully you'll land on a couple of activities, sectors, value chains where you feel there's something there, and then that naturally hopefully leads you to an idea of what actually needs to happen for refugees to use that and to work in that value chain. Does
That
that make
makes a
sense?
lot of sense. Thank you. And I know operationally what that means is your teams have to be working really closely together, because if you've got teams working on different components, they can't just go off and do
Absolutely.
their work
Yeah.
and meet their targets. They all have to be coordinated, because timing and things and adaptation is going to have to occur.
Yeah.
Katie, I see you have your hand up. Would you like to come off mute and say something?
Yeah, sorry if it's a bit loud here. I'm in a cafe, but it's an observation more than anything. So thank you very much for the presentations, all very interesting. And I think for a lot of systems practitioners, it's quite say obvious that we should be working in this way. So I think going back to that operationalization question and observation, for me, there is still a culture of sequencing our programming, particularly when we're working in fragile contexts, because we'll do the push interventions, hoping that one day suddenly there'll be a magic wand and everything will be okay and people will be able to get jobs. And that sequencing is what's preventing us, that sequence thinking, and it's a culture of a way of working, particularly from a humanitarian perspective, rather than layering at a proposal concept phase. And I think that that is symptomatic of the fact that within humanitarian agencies, we are not necessarily thinking about that layering, nor have the experience and the skill set to understand what that future visioning can look like, particularly if you're looking at potentially developing industries or addressing growth constraints in very fragile or thin context, which takes a lot more time than some of the interventions that we're talking about from a push side within the timeframes of humanitarian funding. So they're often not thought about or not included. And I think that then brings us away from just culture and to the funding. Right, and the way the funding, if we want to look at root cause analysis here, is the funding and the way that's structured is pushing that way and those symptoms, that way of working still. And this, unfortunately, has been a discussion now for many, many years. We've been trying to get nexus funding and getting funding that is flexible enough and long-term enough to be able to build in these parallel layered workings, as well as entice systems practitioners who may be not comfortable working in these fragile contexts to come and partner and work with us. And I don't think we've yet succeeded. I think that there is now growing evidence, but I think the big change needs to happen at the donor level to actually see that shift that we're talking about here.
Great points, Katie. Thank you. Yes, and you covered a lot of the challenges all in one short synopsis. That was really good points. And that ties in with a question from Innocent we have in the chat, which is how do you handle donor or other stakeholders' pressure on measurement, considering that push may provide quicker results than pull? And this is right, one of these challenges, Katie, as you allude to, what we often end up doing is doing some quick push activities kind of to make the donor happy, right? Oh, we'll do some transfers, we'll do some training, and then we can show that we've helped some participants, and that will give us time to build the systems work. But in fact, as John said in his piece, what that means is that we've actually lowered the impact in the beginning because you have to work on the systems side in tandem, or people don't have markets for their chickens, or as Nadja pointed out, you're training people to do jobs that there's no need for. So this balance is really challenging. I don't know, Nadja, or I think John is back. Do either of you have any other points on how do you handle that donor pressure? How do you communicate out the vision so that you get the space to achieve the impact you need?
I do have a couple of thoughts, but if John is back, we can give him the floor as well. Is he? I can't see him.
Why don't you go ahead, Nadja, and John?
Nadja,
Okay,
and
then
go ahead. I'm back. Yeah, I'll come in.
Okay, so yeah, no, thanks for these questions. I think these are very, very important remarks. Now, and I agree with Katie that ultimately a lot boils down to the incentives basically that we get from donors. Now we talk a lot about incentives and market systems, and ultimately we as practitioners, we as implementers, will respond to incentives we get from the donor. No, so what do they want to see? What kind of targets, etc. And I agree that there's still a long discussion. We still have a long way ahead kind of in our discussion with donors to help them, because I think we're often talk about this divide between humanitarian and development on the level of implementers, but that also exists on the donor level. No, so you have fundamentally humanitarian donors and fundamentally kind of long-term development donors. And I think there is still a lot of work to be done to kind of get them to understand each other better and give us as implementers, maybe even in humanitarian context, more flexibility also to test things and work towards long-term initiatives rather than focusing on these quick wins that need to happen in the first 6 months of a project. No, that said, I would like to say also that I do think a lot of things have happened already in that space. No, when we started working with the UNHCR in 2014, that discussion was not happening at all yet. And so it really felt like this is the first time that that we come together and we spoke very different languages. And so now at least you have all these platforms, no? RSRI being one, the MIG community, like there's a lot of platforms and a lot of webinars, events, conferences happening that actually address this issue. And I think we've come a long way, but that is not to say that we have to keep working on these issues, no? But then in the meantime, what can we do as projects? I do agree. I mean, for starters, it really depends on which donor you're working with. No, I think there's a couple of donors also that are moving, that are traditionally kind of market systems donors and are moving into that space of doing market systems development in fragile contexts and forced displacement contexts, and that will be more inclined to give you the flexibility that you need to kind of work towards long-term results. But then in the absence of that, we've also had projects where, yeah, we apply that. No, as Sasha, you just outlined, you run a couple of trainings, and maybe it doesn't need to be technical trainings, because I think there's a danger also, no, in creating expectations with people that ultimately can't be fulfilled if there's technical trainings. But what we use is kind of also business management trainings, soft skill trainings, that can ultimately, they're useful in any case. And so maybe run these interventions that lead to these quick wins while you figure out the long-term systemic stuff that needs more time, and that needs a little bit, of analysis and testing and so forth.
Great points. Thank you, Nadja. I know we're getting close to the end, but John, do you want to jump in with some other thoughts?
Just to share the same thought with Nadja, I would say yes, this has been a long journey, and donors are beginning to realize, and that's why even these days you see funding in the refugee spaces used to be 1 year, 18 months. These days you see longer funding periods, meaning I think the voice of the organizations that have been trying to push more systems thinking, more resilient engagements and implementation is being heard, and you're beginning to see the length is growing. But also I think I wanted to say that the most important thing is to keep the donor as a partner and somebody who you're able to talk to and say, look, this is the pothole we've hit and we are not going to be able to push beyond this unless we do this. We've also seen there are so many approaches that have evolved, and there's been a lot of learning in the space, and therefore that has also increased confidence in the donors that as much as sometimes the start may be shaky, but if there's a clear strategy of how this is going towards a sustainable modality, they will always be willing to listen. But engagement and communication has always been one of the things that I think sharing those challenges and key learnings that as along the way is one of the ways that I've seen this changing.
Thank you, both of you. I realize we are at the top of the hour, but this has been really helpful. There were some other good questions in the chat. One that I noted is that question about how do you handle confusion in the team on prioritization and approach, as both require different skills. And I know this is a really good question that I have had so many conversations with teams about. I know it's one we've struggled with. I know we don't have all the clear answers yet, but I think maybe this is something we could be working on. Maybe this is something next year we try and tackle, putting together more guidance or bringing together some people to brainstorm things people have done that have worked, because making this actually work on the ground is the challenge. It is a lovely idea in theory. The challenge is the timing, the skills, the sequencing, the resources, the donor management. Change is not easy. But thank you everybody for joining. We will have the recording available. Thank you, Nadja and John, for your sharing, and look forward next year. Hopefully we will do more learning on these topics. So happy end of 2024, everybody. Goodbye.
Thanks so much. Bye.